Hello guys and welcome to another history podcast. We are here on a live stage with PrinceBlip, TheLoneRaptor and Rogue. And today we're gonna speak about the DD, the US DD, the Obannon. And we speak about the history and the facts that lead to the myth that a USS destroyer sank a submarine with potatoes. So it's gonna be interesting about things that we're gonna explain if it is myth or if it is a true. So the TheLoneRaptor is with the script. PrinceBlip is an honor to be here also. From Wargaming. So we're gonna start unveiling the facts that lead to that myth. So please, I will be your guest and I will manage the chat and all the things around the scene. So Raptor, you have my words today.
All right.
Please go on.
Thank you, Papa. All right. So before I go any further, I'd like to thank Dark Seas on YouTube for bringing this story to my attention. I listened to him. He's got really good videos about anything history, mainly military, and just want to give that quick shout out to him. But we'll jump to the construction and commissioning. The USS Obannon was one of the first Fletcher-class destroyers to be built and was the second of 31 Fletcher-class destroyers to be launched by the Bath Iron Works Corporation, launching with her sister ship, the USS Nicholas. The USS Obannon, DD-450, was laid down by the Bath Iron Works Corporation in Bath, Maine on March 3, 1941, and was launched on February 19, 1942. The Obannon was named after First Lieutenant Presley Obannon, the Marine Corps hero of Derna, and the Obannon was commissioned at Boston on June 26, 1942, with Commander Irwin R. Wilkinson being assigned command of the ship.
Excellent. So we are speaking for a Fletcher-class destroyer. Am I right?
That is correct.
One of the early Fletcher-class destroyers. So, and a couple of things to note here is that it's one of the, quote, Bath-made destroyers, which, because Fletchers were made all over the United States. There's over 100 of them, 150 if I remember offhand. But the Bath-made destroyers were kind of renowned to be some of the better ones in terms of quality control and just overall performance. So you're already on one of the good side of performance going into this. And the namesake of the ship, First Lieutenant Presley Obannon, is a Marine Corps legend, and that goes way back to the events with the first Barbary War, which in early U.S. history we had a lot of problems with the Barbary pirates, and essentially he was a hero during those times for the U.S. Marines and is one of the kind of like founding core fathers of sorts. So like I highly recommend looking into the Lieutenant Obannon himself if you want an interesting story from olden times.
Very nice. So I have to say that there are only 4 Fletcher-class destroyers at the moment around the world, and one, as we call in Greece, the Velos-class destroyer, is on my port. I mean, it is a few kilometers away of my city and is sitting there on the port, waiting for me to go there and pick up some photos. But it is one of the 4 that they've been around the world, and at the moment it is a museum ship that you can go visit. I don't know the fate of the other 3 DDs that are around the world, but the Velos, as we said in Greece, is the US Charioteer. So we have it on our navy and it's a museum ship now. And I think it also has built its own myths and all that stuff. So that's why it remains as a museum ship. So please go on.
Just adding on, the Fletcher class is having so many different ships and so many different captains and crewmen. There's been generations of sailors that have worked on these ships, and there are plenty of stories and legends about these ships, and Obannon is just one of them. But it's probably one of the most entertaining of the group.
So after its commissioning in 1942, the Obannon was briefly trained in the Caribbean and sailed from Boston on August 29th to the South Pacific, where the Guadalcanal campaign was just starting to begin. Obannon was assigned to the Destroyer Squadron 21, also known as Desron 21, and played a valiant part in these endeavors, even being awarded a Presidential Unit Citation. By April 1942, the Japanese forces had taken over the island of Guadalcanal and built an air base called Ranga Point. At this time, the U.S. was doing their best to dislodge the Japanese from the Key Solomon Islands. 4 months after the completion of the Ranga Point Air Base, the Allies were able to regain control of the air base and renamed it Henderson Field.
Yeah, so one of the things to keep in mind with the Guadalcanal campaign as a whole is that this is the U.S. learning how to amphibious warfare, in a sense, in the modern era. But also the element of air power is very much a key focus with Guadalcanal. Part of the point of the campaign for the Americans is to outflank another air base, as well as to establish area control in the area, because the Japanese Air Force, well, Naval Air Force, and the Air Force itself are still a really valid threat at this point. So they're kind of taking their baby steps in a sense. Henderson Airfield becomes a key air base in the whole campaign and in the region.
So, the Japanese, furious with the loss of Ranga Point, decided that they would rather destroy the airbase than let the Allies use it against them. By October 1942, the USS Obannon carried out escort duties, protected landings, performed night patrols, and joined in sea-to-land bombardments in the neighboring islands. On November 7th, 1942, the Obannon joined Rear Admiral Daniel J. Collingham's support group, ready to sail with a convoy carrying crucial reinforcements, replacements, food, ammunition, and aviation material to supply Henderson Field. On approach to Guadalcanal, Obannon sighted and fired upon a surfaced Japanese submarine, continuing to fire at the vessel until the convoy was able to pass safely out of danger.
That's very interesting. So, as a listener, I'm gonna say how the DDs engage in a warfare with the submarines. I mean, we have to explain to people how the duel happened with a DD and a submarine, and I think Blip can explain that, because people think that submarines are underwater, but the main use is to go underwater and be silent. But what happens when the submarines were surfaced?
So these submarines of World War II are not Cold War submarines. They're not designed like Cold War submarines, and they're actually more so designed for on-surface travel than they are underwater travel. That's kind of a key difference between a Cold War era submarine and the World War II era submarines, is that World War II era submarines will tend to be faster on the surface than they will be underwater, whereas a Cold War submarine will be faster underwater than on the surface, and that's just due to how their hydrodynamic design is made, but also to an extent their propulsion systems. World War II submarines, you're still looking at diesel propulsion for being on the surface, and relatively, by our standards, primitive electrical propulsion for underwater, which means that you only get a few hours underwater at a time before you need to come to the surface and recharge, as well as your oxygen supply, as well as your electrical, your batteries. And so the Japanese destroyer was just on the surface and had poor timing. One thing to keep in mind is that Japanese and American submarines are larger than German submarines. People always hear about the U-boats and how you could dive pretty quickly in a U-boat and get underwater and be more or less safe from gunfire. It takes a lot longer for a Japanese or an American submarine to dive because they're such larger vessels in order to cover the larger distances in the Pacific.
That's the main differences, so the audience have to know about that. So at the moment when a submarine sees a destroyer, what is the main tactic that they have to follow? I mean, they will dive immediately, or they will try to engage with the weapons. And what weapons a submarine has to engage a destroyer in that fight? I mean, I know that a destroyer has many possibilities to win a fight on a surface submarine, but I'm curious to see about the weaponry and the armory.
Right. So a typical Japanese submarine for this time is probably going to have one or two 25mm anti-aircraft guns, and that's kind of shaky. That might not be the case for all submarines. And they're going to have a deck gun of some sort. Usually it's going to be a 4-inch gun, so a 102mm gun, and so it's not going to be comparable in firepower to a destroyer by any regards. So your main hope is going to be to try to dive before they can hit you, but that can be difficult.
On the afternoon of November 12th, 5 days after the fight with the submarine, the mostly empty convoy of transport vessels was attacked by 16 Japanese torpedo bombers, and out of the 16 planes that attacked, 11 were shot down, with the Obannon attacking at least 4 of the aircraft, but having no confirmed kills.
And so the area around Guadalcanal by this point in time is still contested. You have American forces are taking control of the skies, but basically during the daytime you will have Japanese planes coming over pretty constantly through this period.
So Blip, we have an area of an airfield that both USS and the Japanese wanted. They wanted even for themselves or to be destroyed, or for nobody, as I said. So it was a very contested area at the moment.
In the days and weeks prior to these events that are happening right now, the Japanese army has attempted to retake the airfield by land, and this is the famous, or if anybody of you have seen the HBO miniseries The Pacific, this is the battle where Sergeant Basilone and his machine gun crew fight to protect the airfield, and where Sergeant Basilone earns his Medal of Honor. In that series and in history, after that failure of an attack by the Japanese, then it's decided that the Navy is going to do their utmost to destroy the airfield
for not using nobody, so no man's land.
So not long after the Obannon's convoy escort, word came that a large Japanese force was moving south with haste. The Japanese naval force consisted of 2 battleships, that being Hiei and Kirishima, 1 light cruiser, Nagara, and 14 destroyers, which included Yukikaze, Akatsuki, and Udachi, all heading towards Henderson Field to bombard them and cover the reinforcements while they're in the area.
Because the Japan had a follow-up convoy coming the next day of 11 transport ships, and they needed to secure the airspace by bombarding the airfield so that this convoy could reach shore.
The Obannon and other ships of the support force, which included 2 heavy cruisers, the USS San Francisco and USS Portland, 3 light cruisers, USS Helena, Juno, and Atlanta, and 8 destroyers, which included the original Fletcher class destroyer and the USS Laffey. They confronted the greatly superior Japanese forces on the early morning of November 13th in the Iron Bottom Sound. And if you want to touch on the how the name of Iron Bottom Sound got its name.
Yeah. So Iron Bottom Sound is at this time it wouldn't be called Iron Bottom Sound, but after the battles of Guadalcanal, this area basically so many ships are sunk here that it gets nicknamed Iron Bottom Sound because basically the bottom of the ocean is covered in ships, and so it's basically just a play on words. And so the American forces are approaching are basically they're heading north, northwest at this point, and the Japanese forces are heading southeast. And the American forces start picking up the Japanese forces on radar. And the thing is that radar control is still fairly new to the United States, and the ability to get that information in a condensed manner for the Admiral, which the Admiral in charge is Admiral Callahan. Admiral Norman Scott is also there in the USS Atlanta. Callahan starts getting reports from different cruisers and different destroyers that they're picking up stuff on radar, and he orders everybody to turn north so that he can attempt to cross their T. And at this point, the lineup is. You have a picture of the lineup. Leading the column, you have the destroyers USS Cushing, Laffey, Sterrett, and you have the Obannon. Following them, you have the Atlanta, USS San Francisco, the Portland, Helena, and Juneau, followed by 4 more destroyers. And they're essentially moving in a column to the north. And the confusion is the name of the game here. It's nighttime. Nobody can really see very clearly. And there's radar contacts in many different directions. The Japanese force is also disorganized. As you can see in the picture, you have 3 destroyers that are at the very top, the Samadara, Murasame, and Asagumo. They were supposed to be way out in front of the Japanese force to detect oncoming enemies, and they had gotten lost. So things are not going well for either side of the engagement right now.
Things are heating up, as we see on the map. It's going to be a tough fight.
Yep. And so the American destroyers everybody's given the order to turn north, and the American destroyers turn north and are getting ready to start the engagement. Admiral Callahan gives the order to stand by to open fire. He then reverses that command, says turn north again, and then basically at that point things start the line gets crunched, and the destroyers are confused, and so they're wiggling about a little bit, and the Atlanta is catching up to the destroyers and has to turn left. And basically right at that time, the Japanese forces, or rather the Hiei and the Akatsuki, light up Atlanta with their searchlights. And this is basically where the fighting begins. And the Atlanta gets lit up almost immediately, but she also fires back. And personally, I believe that it was Atlanta that also sank the Akatsuki. But Atlanta receives shell hits from Akatsuki, a torpedo, and hits from Hiei as well, but also receives friendly fire from the USS San Francisco.
Yeah, friendly fire. That I think that the friendly fire makes some very devastating damage.
Yeah.
I mean, there are members that they are wounded, some officer, if I remember very well. But please go on, Blip.
Yeah, Admiral Norman Scott is aboard the Atlanta and is killed in the fire. It's not necessarily certain whether or not he was killed by the friendly fire or the earlier fire, because Atlanta goes up very quickly, so there's not very many records of what exactly happened when. And the battle is going into chaos. The destroyers are still heading north, especially the leading two destroyers, Cushing and Laffey. They're now seeing that they have the light cruiser and the series of destroyers off their right side, and have Hiei coming up, literally coming almost straight into them from the left. And so Laffey and Cushing can fire torpedoes, but they are so close that the torpedoes dud. It's also early war American torpedoes, so they dud. And they light up Hiei from point blank range with their 5-inch guns. Not likely those 5-inch guns would be able to deal significant damage to a Congo class battleship, even at the point blank range. But it's starting the hell that will become the entire Hiei very shortly.
So we have a Congo class Japanese battleship staying there, trying to make the best thing out in a dark area with no lights. So things are pretty rough. Atlanta is already sunk, so the scenery is very bad for both the USS and the Japanese. So it is a hard scenario in a dark map with a lot of things, and two fleets are going mad each other. But
so during the attack, the Obannon bully attacks the battleship Hiei, closing in so close that Hiei could not depress her main battery far enough to actually fire on the destroyer. So
hold on here. So that is amazing. So we have the USS destroyer closing up too much, so the battleship can aim them. So it is happened like that, or it is a myth?
This almost definitely happened, and it not only to the Obannon but also to Laffey and to Cushing. The Laffey and Cushing cross Hiei's bow, and Cushing is leading the column. So Cushing goes across, and then Laffey barely makes it across, almost gets rammed by Hiei. That's how close they are. And Hiei can't fire at those two destroyers, and it is at this time that the destroyer behind Laffey is Sterret. Sterret basically has to stop to avoid hitting something or for some other reason, and Obannon has to swing around to the right side of Cushing. So Laffey crosses the bow of Hiei to the left side of Hiei. Hiei follows Laffey in the turn and turns left and starts running away, basically. Obannon makes its turn around Sterret and then chases down Hiei to the point where it's basically neck and neck, overtakes Hiei, and then turns out.
Oh my god! I mean,
to the right.
Can you guys imagine that in full dark map? I mean, you can see nothing at all unless you put your lights and light up, and you do all those moves inside a battleship Congo class. I mean, I don't know what these people were thinking. in that time, but it is amazing.
Yeah, and so at this point, the U.S. cruisers San Francisco and Portland are able to fire at Hiei, and this is near as enough as makes no difference is point blank range for any ships in this engagement. And the Congo class may be a battleship, but at its heart it was a battle cruiser, and at the firing modern ammunition, not super heavy ammunition, but modern ammunition. The 8-inch guns of San Francisco and Portland are able to deal significant amounts of damage to Hiei in a rather short time. They disable Hiei's steering to where she has to basically run straight and go manual. Obannon claims 3 torpedo hits on Hiei. All the destroyers basically claim a lot of torpedo hits. It's not determined how many actually went off and actually hit. But the thing is that Obannon is now overtaken Hiei and is turning away and is running north again. Laffy has already been sunk. She had crossed Hiei's bow and then was engaged by the Nagara and several other destroyers, and she was going down. Obannon basically runs over Laffy, and it is at this time that Laffy explodes and causes damage to Obannon, but not serious enough to really affect her much. But at this point, the fight is mostly over for Obannon.
So as PrinceBlip brought up, support fire from other American ships heavily damaged Hiei to the point where it became incapacitated, leaving her a sitting duck for American air attacks, which forced her scuttling the next day. Let's see, the first engagement of the naval battle of Guadalcanal was short but devastating. 2 American light cruisers and 4 destroyers were lost at sea, while only the Japanese lost 2 destroyers and the battleship Hiei. Although the Japanese force still heavily outnumbered the American support force, the Japanese turned back and Henderson Field was saved from destruction. The importance of this success is illustrated by the fact that the next day Henderson aviators sank 11 enemy troop transports attempting to reinforce the island.
Yep, and because the whole background to this battle is that Henderson Airfield controls the air and the ability for Japan to reinforce the island, and so Japanese forces knew that these transports were coming in. They knew they had to disable the airfield at least, and they did not succeed in this objective, which meant that the American forces could decimate, well, worse than decimate, could absolutely destroy the convoy the next day, all 11 ships.
So next is the fun part, the potato episode. True story or a naval legend? So before we jump in to what is referred to the potato episode or potato incident, I must state that this event has some doubt surrounding it in regards to how accurate Ernest's recalling of the event is. We'll be touching on the more plausible unfolding of the event, but we'll be reading Ernest's recollection of the events that unfolded first. So this, what I'm about to read, is an excerpt told by Ernest her, a radio man on the Obannon. So on April 5th, 1943, Desron 21 was returning from a night of shelling Japanese shore installations deep in the New Georgia area of the Solomon Islands. Our destroyer, the Obannon, was part of this force, picked up a radar contact that turned out to be a large Japanese submarine cruising on the surface and apparently unaware of our presence. The Japanese lookouts undoubtedly were fast asleep. While we approached rapidly, we were preparing to ram the sub. Our captain and other officers on the bridge were trying to identify the type of sub and decided at the last minute that it could be a mine layer. Not wanting to blow up ourselves along with the sub, the decision was made that ramming was not a wise move. At the last moment, the rudder was swung hard to avoid collision, and we found ourselves in a rather embarrassing situation as we sailed alongside the Japanese submarine. On board the sub, Japanese sailors, wearing dark shorts and dinky blue hats, were sleeping on the deck. In what could be considered a rude awakening, they sat up to see American destroyers sailing alongside. Our ship, however, was far too close to permit our guns lowered enough to fire, since no one on deck carried a gun. Not a shot was heard. Ditto on the Japanese sub, no one had a gun either. In this situation, no one seemed sure of the proper course of action, as it probably wouldn't have been covered in the manual anyway. Therefore, everyone was just started more or less spellbound. The submarine was equipped with a 3-inch deck gun, and the sub's captain finally decided that now was probably a good time to use it. As the Japanese sailors ran towards their gun, our deck parties reached into storage bins that were located nearby and picked out some potatoes and threw them at sailors on the deck of the sub.
So that was from the radio man.
Yeah, it's from the radio man, yeah. I'm not quite done yet. I'm trying to find the image. I thought I already had it. There we go. Alright, potatoes everybody. You're on the Obannon, you see a submarine.
So you see that around how many meters? 5, 6, 10 meters? And you think you're gonna sink this boy with the potatoes?
Well, that's the thing. The potato battle ensued. Apparently the Japanese sailors thought that the potatoes were hand grenades. This kept them very busy as they tried to get rid of them by throwing them back at the Obannon or over the side of the sub. Thus occupied, they were too busy to man their deck gun, which gave the Obannon sufficient time to put a little distance between them and the sub. Finally, we were far away enough to bring our guns to bear, and firing commenced. One of our shells managed to hit the sub's conning tower, but the sub managed to submerge. At the time, our ship was able to pass directly over the sub for a depth charge attack. Later information showed the sub did sink. And when the Association of Potato Growers of Maine heard about this strange episode, they sent a plaque to commemorate the event, and the plaque was mounted in an appropriate area near the crew's mess hall for the entire crew to see.
Yeah, so the tendency of naval stories to be embellished throughout history are quite famous and well noted, and especially like once a sailor hears a story, they will tend to latch onto it. This is one of those apocryphal stories of naval legend that could have happened, could not have happened, and there are several different accounts of it that are very similar to each other, but different in various ways. And the only one that's very much that says this very much never happened is the ship's commander. And so I tend for this one, I tend to on the side of something probably happened along these lines, and it's not implausible to me. It's something that I could see happening, and it's the way that the radio man tells it seems to be at least things line up to where things make sense in a way. But it is a fantastical tale, and so we'll probably never be entirely for certain whether or not it is actually true.
Do you believe that the incident could have been used for propaganda purposes, to give the guys some hope and saying, well, we can even sink a ship or a submarine in this case with a potato. What can we do as a unit, as the US, as a unit? What can we do? What can stop us?
Oh, absolutely. This is exactly the sort of tale that the propaganda machine of the U.S. would want. I remember looking into this at some point, and I believe that it was actually used as a propaganda tool or story at one point, but I do not remember the exact details on that and how much it was used. And it's definitely the sort of story where it's like pretty ridiculous, but at the same time, considering all the different things that American forces get up to in wars in both World War II and World War I and everything else that I've heard, it's not outside the realms of possibility.
Yeah, from what I recall, seeing that Reader's Digest got their hands on the story, I'm from sailors either on the Obannon or just in general, and went wild with it, spreading it around for American propaganda. But now we're gonna touch into what probably actually happened. So as exciting and action-packed as the story that Ernest said was, his telling of the events was most likely not true. Donald MacDonald, the Obannon skipper, recalls a different tale of events that unfolded. MacDonald, once getting confirmation that a Japanese submarine was nearby, immediately went into action. He ordered the crew to drop 3 depth charges and also ordered his 20mm and 40mm gun crews to open fire on the submarine. The depth charges straddled the sub, while 16 rounds from the 20 and 40mm guns struck the conning tower. Obannon came back for a second attack, dropping more depth charges while firing both her 20 and 40mm guns. Before the Obannon was able to make a third pass to the attack, the submarine attacked the submarine. Obannon reported that the target, end quote, blew up as a result of firing. At 2:50 a.m., MacDonald reported to the rest of the task group that the enemy vessel was still on the surface and damaged but unable to dive. Commander MacDonald later wrote, "This contact may be considered a destroyer's officer's dream. First there were radar contacts, then sight contact, then the submarine was hit and remained dead in the water while the Obannon came close enough to throw depth charges at her, and finally send her to the bottom. When daylight finally arrived hours later, after the attack, pilots reported a thick oil slick as well as debris from the location, giving Obannon credit for the probable sinking of the submarine. The American press was quick to pick up Ernest's story of the event and printed it as an epic tale of an American destroyer that attacked an enemy submarine by throwing potatoes at the surprised Japanese crew sleeping on the deck. The tall tale began to take on such a big life of its own that some of the former crewmen of the Obannon began telling and retelling audiences, making it more difficult to disprove. Long after the war, MacDonald himself admitted, "I've been trying to drive a stake through this story for years." He agreed that he maneuvered the Obannon close enough to the enemy submarine, but explained that even the crew member with the best throwing arm could not have tossed a potato or anything across the gap. It can be concluded that the rumor was born after the Obannon's lookout, the ship's cook, told MacDonald that he thought he could have thrown potatoes at the boat, and the rumor spread from there.
I think that we all know what happened, so we are leaning to the facts that they are saying that I don't know if I were a seaman on a Japanese submarine and be scared of things going over my head, but I will be panicked.
I mean, you gotta remember, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, so it's dark out. They just woke up and they're seeing circular things being thudded onto their deck. So
you're gonna be confused for sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The American grenades of the time do look somewhat potato shaped. The old joke is that they're avocado shaped, but it's quite a similar. It is quite a similar shape. I do tend to think that it's probably like it's a plausible tale. It's a fantastic tale. But the likelihood of it happening in the way that it is told is very small. But you never quite know for sure. I mean, later there are stories from ship's crews of HMS Conqueror, the submarine, For example, famously, the crew claims they had a pet elephant on board at one point on the submarine. And to this day, nobody's disproved it. So, there's still a possibility out there. Of course, you have the apocryphal story of Oscar or Unsinkable Sam. But we have two pictures of two different cats named Unsinkable Sam. And it seems very unlikely. And so this is one of those tales that seems more plausible than a lot of other tales out there, if you ask me.
Yeah, but for me, I have to say that the exciting part is not the potato incident. It's the fact that that battle begins with a heated situation. We had duels, we had ships going down in 30 minutes of the engagement, so we had many more. So that thing with the submarine in the end of the story is like the cherry on top of the sweet. So for me, I would say it happened, but not the way they said it. But it happened. It really happened for me, because I can see them engaging close and all that stuff, and then dropping the charges to finish the submarine. So it was a close engagement, and for sure, as I said, if I was on the deck of the submarine or in the bridge or on the conning tower, I would be very, very confused if enemy is gonna throw me things that I couldn't see in the dark. So,
and like it's like another thing to keep in mind, that it's in World War II, at least, it's not unusual to run across it, or it's not impossible to run across accounts where crewmen engage submarine crew at very close ranges. So you have, of course, there's the famous capture of U-505, where U.S. forces capture a German U-boat. There's another case where Canadian forces take a U-boat basically barehanded.
They just asked nicely.
without shirt. Well, it's not just barehanded, but it's also half naked. They're not wearing shirts or anything. It's a crazy tale, but I cannot remember exactly which U-boat it is, unfortunately. But there's so many factors in this. It's just like how much of it is true and how much is it false, and then what can we piece together is, and it's one of those things that we'll never get the full picture of, unfortunately.
But I'm sure that it's safe to say that as Americans, we can agree that it would not be out of the picture to see U.S. sailors throwing potatoes at a Japanese submarine or anything.
Oh, absolutely.
Just throwing potatoes at anything.
Yeah. Like, I mean, the Americans from World War II are extremely high humor people. And or at least during the war they were, and it's almost perfectly within character for the American GI.
Okay, that's very good. So Blip, I see the Rockstabber saying that the incident was the U-94, the U-boat 94. So we have that info from the chat. chat. So I think that we all agree that the story was very good. So do you have any questions or any things to close up the podcast?
I guess it should be noted that this is not the end of the USS Obannon story. She goes on to serve throughout the war. She has a bunch of new, other battles that she's involved in, but this is definitely the most famous incident that she is. And she goes on to serve into the 1960s, and has a good service career as a Fletcher, I would say.
Raptor, you're gonna close the stage. You want to say something?
I got a little bit of a conclusion. So the story of the Obannon doesn't end there, as Prince brought up, but ours does. If you're interested in reading more about the Obannon, we'll go and post links to the sources that were used for this stage, so you can learn more if you feel so inclined. I appreciate the time that you guys have given to listen to our first Naval History cast, and look forward to making more of these casts in the future. I already have a few more interesting stories on hand to tell, but if you have any suggestions or requests for a history cast you'd like to hear, please feel free to leave your suggestion, and maybe we'll make an episode on it.
Excellent. Blip, you have the final word to close the podcast.
Yeah. So thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks for having me on for the history podcast, and have a good night.
So guys, thank you very much. For me, I want to thank the TheLoneRaptor for the script, PrinceBlip for being here, RoguePLc for the support, and also the community residents for being here as chat moderators or helping the scene go live. Thank you guys very much. Wish you all the best for the podcast. We are on the end. The stage is gonna be live a bit more, so we're gonna close our recordings now, and we are ready to hear you if you have any queries. If not, we're gonna close it.